Lower Manhattan, New York City, September 11, 2001. This tragic event marked the declaration of a global war on terror led by the United States government and its allies. The world changed after 9/11.
September the 11th, for me, was a wake-up call.
Since then, governments across the world have introduced anti-terror laws which have compromised our essential liberties. Here in the UK, these laws are increasingly being used to discipline those who are outspoken about the government's behaviour. The Western invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq have claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. The British government lied to the public about the threat posed from Saddam Hussein.
There is a threat from Saddam Hussein, and the weapons of mass destruction that he has acquired is not in doubt at all.
No weapons of mass destruction were ever found in Iraq.
Well, one only has to refer to the Downing Street memo, in which Richard Dearlove told Tony Blair that the United States had committed to a policy of regime change based upon the existence of weapons of mass destruction, that this was a very thin case that couldn't be sustained with any facts, and yet, because regime change was decided upon, the intelligence would be fixed to the policy.
Former servicemen and women have testified that the methods used in these wars have been illegal and inhumane.
Naked prisoners on dog leads, covered in shit, made to eat shit, terrorised by dogs.
And Blair's got the cheek to say that he's got God on his side as well. That's what really annoys me.
God?
You could basically kill anybody you wanted. I mean, it was that easy. You didn't even have to get off and dig a hole or anything like that. All you had to do was have something there for a picture. You were driving down the road 3 a.m, there's a guy on the side of the road, shoot him, throw a shovel off. There you go.
The white phosphorus will disperse in a cloud. And when it makes contact with skin, then it's absolutely irreversible damage, burning flesh to the bone. It doesn't necessarily burn clothes, but it will burn the skin underneath clothes.
Far from enjoying peaceful and democratic regimes, the people of Afghanistan and Iraq are now living in violent and unstable societies. British companies have made profits in excess of 1.1 billion from the Iraq War. Oil and gas deals signed in Afghanistan and Iraq have benefited Western corporations, not the people of the Middle East. Several memos now in the public domain confirm that the British Prime Minister and the American President agreed to invade Iraq regardless of what the UN Security Council decided. According to a leaked official memo, Bush and Blair discussed flying U-2 spy planes disguised in UN colours over Iraq to provoke Saddam Hussein into retaliation. This is just more evidence of the smoke and mirror tactics adopted by the Western power elite. For a number of years now, it has been readily accepted that the official story of 9/11 does not stand up to independent scrutiny. In the 5 years since, irrefutable evidence has emerged indicating that 9/11 was an inside job.
We started running, floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was as if they had detonated. They were planning to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
Politicians, scientists, journalists, academics, researchers, even Hollywood actors have gone public. Thousands of 9/11 activists around the world have been spreading the facts. Yet the mass media still barely covers this mounting body of evidence and ignores the views of millions in the US and tens of millions across the world. In the year 2000, a document entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses was published by a private right-wing US think tank known as the Project for the New American Century, or the Neocons. In it, they laid out their plans for Middle East domination in order to maintain control of the world's energy resources. They noted that a cataclysmic and catalyzing event, like the attack on Pearl Harbor during World War II, would help mobilize American opinion behind their war agenda. 9/11 was that event. As a result, the majority of British politicians supported the US-led war on terror. Recently, the UK and Ireland 9/11 Truth Movement have lobbied MPs to take a look at the compelling evidence that contradicts the official story. Judging from their responses, it appears most MPs deem themselves too busy to even consider the possibility that they have been duped for so long. Unfortunately, the majority dismiss rigorous scientific research and objective evidence as conspiracy theories. It is simply no longer plausible that the British government and its security services are unaware of the facts which indicate that 9/11 and other terrorist attacks were false flag operations. For a number of years, the evidence of MI5 and MI6 complicity in terrorist acts has been publicly available. Undercover intelligence agents who penetrated the IRA have risked their lives to expose the army and MI5's role in arms dealing, terrorist bombings, and the murder of civilians. I know from painful personal experience that MI6 in 1996 funded associates of Osama bin Laden in Libya to carry out an assassination on Colonel Gaddafi. That operation went wrong and killed innocent civilians. Publicly available records confirm that the intelligence services have in the past sheltered and protected terrorists. These include Osama bin Laden, Abu Qatada, and Haroun Aswat. In the 1990s, inquiries conducted by the Italian Parliament concluded that NATO and MI6 had supplied right-wing extremists with arms and explosives. Under the codename Operation Gladio, these were then used to assassinate public figures and cause terrorist atrocities, which were then blamed on left-wing groups. It is now clear that false flag operations are part of a strategy of tension designed to instill fear in the civilian population and create unprovoked hatred towards minority groups. On the 7th of July 2005, several explosions occurred on the public transport system in the City of London. The police initially reported that power surges had caused the blasts. Hours later, this scenario was discounted. In the 2 days that followed, different accounts emerged concerning the times that the bombs detonated. 2 days later, London Underground, the Metropolitan Police, and the British Transport Police reported that 3 bombs exploded almost simultaneously on 3 separate tubes at around 0850. Almost an hour later, at approximately 0947, another bomb exploded on a bus in Tavistock Square. 52 passengers were killed.
The police and the government have admitted that their knowledge of what happened that morning remains incomplete. Reports released by the Home Office and the Intelligence and Security Committee in May 2006 are loaded with uncertainties and speculation. Yet the government continues to insist that a public inquiry is not necessary. They say that time and resources are not available to investigate Britain's worst ever terrorist attack.
Based on information provided by the police and the intelligence and security agencies, but largely not in the public domain, the Home Office's official chronology has only raised more questions than it answers.
If London could survive the Blitz, it can survive 4 miserable bombers like this. I'm not saying there are 4 bombers, 4 miserable events like this.
Little is known for certain of the 4 men's movements and the picture is only further confused by sloppy drafting, unclear sourcing of information, and confusion of speculation and comment. No official has publicly admitted responsibility for compiling the report. On the 7th of July, several interesting stories emerged. Amy Teeble, writing for the Associated Press, reported that the Israeli embassy in London had received a warning of possible terrorist attacks from Scotland Yard, minutes before the bombs exploded. Officials have said Israeli Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not leave his hotel to attend an economic conference because of this warning.
On the day of 7/7, Peter Power, the managing director of Visor Consultants, gave an interview to the BBC and ITN. In those interviews, he made it abundantly clear that his organisation was running a counter-terrorist training exercise which involved bombs going off simultaneously at different London Underground stations.
Today we were running an exercise for a company, bearing in mind I'm now in the private sector, and we sat everybody down in the city, 1,000 people involved in the whole organisation, but the crisis team. And the most peculiar thing was we based our scenario on the simultaneous attacks on the Underground and mainline station. So we had to suddenly switch an exercise from fictional to real. And one of the first things is, get that bureau number. When you have a list of people missing, tell them. And it took a long time.
Just to get this right, you were actually working today on an exercise that envisioned virtually this scenario.
Almost precisely. I was up until 2 o'clock this morning because it's our job, my own company, Visor Consultants. We specialise in helping people to get their crisis management response. How do you jump from slow time thinking to quick time doing? And we chose a scenario with their assistance which is based on a terrorist attack because they're very close to a property occupied by Jewish businessmen. They're in the city, and there are more American banks in the city than there are in the whole of New York. A logical thing to do. And I've still got the...
I was going to say, how extraordinary today must feel for you as it unfolds.
Of all the targets the terrorists could have chosen in London, they apparently elected to attack the same targets as had been envisaged by Visor Consultants in their counter-terrorist training exercise.
It was at 9:30 this morning. We were actually running an exercise for over a company of 1,000 people in London based on simultaneous bombs going off precisely at the railway stations that happened this morning. So I still have the hairs on the back of my neck standing upright.
To get this quite straight, you were running an exercise to see how you would cope with this, and it happened while you were running the exercise?
Precisely. And it was about 9:30 this morning. We'd planned this for a company, and for obvious reasons I don't want to reveal their name, but if they're listening they'll know it. And we had a room full of crisis managers for the first time they met. And so within 5 minutes we made a pretty rapid decision, this is the real one. And so we went through the correct drills of activating crisis management procedures to jump from slow time to quick time thinking and so on.
Peter Power, Visor Consultants and London Underground have refused to release any more details of this counter-terrorist training exercise.
According to the Home Office, during the early hours of the 7th of July, 3 men travelled together by car from Leeds to Luton rail station. A fourth drove from Aylesbury to Luton. These 4 men were then apparently observed moving items between the cars before putting on large rucksacks and proceeding to enter Luton station. The men reportedly got a train which left Luton station at 7:40, arriving at King's Cross Thameslink at 8:23, before heading towards the London Underground, splitting up around 7 minutes later.
We contacted the King's Cross and Luton officials. They let us have the databases for that morning. The train was clearly cancelled, and we then interviewed commuters on the platform. They told us that it wasn't running that day, and we got details of how each of the trains that did run were delayed.
The 3 then allegedly boarded tube trains on separate lines. Mohammed Sadiq Khan is presumed to board a westbound Circle Line train. Jermaine Lindsay, a southbound Piccadilly Line train, and Shazad Tanweer, an eastbound Circle Line train. At 9:10 that morning, the 3 men each allegedly set off a bomb at almost exactly the same time.
From my experience as a counter-terrorist officer, I have knowledge about the kind and amount of explosives that are used in terrorist attacks. The police have said that all the bombs were placed on the floor of the carriages, but they haven't made clear which side of the floor the bombs were placed on. A number of witnesses have described how they saw metal pushing up into the carriage, which would be consistent with bombs being placed underneath the trains.
had just left Edgware Road Station when suddenly they felt they had a massive explosion. And some passengers described how the tiles, the covers on the floor of the train suddenly flew up, raised up.
Witnesses reported seeing flashes and fireballs. Others suffered extreme burns. These occurrences are not consistent with experiments carried out on TATP. Instead, they are much more consistent with the kind of damage caused by dynamite or military explosive like C4.
The Intelligence and Security Committee stated in May 2006, post-incident forensic analysis has shown that the explosions were caused by homemade organic peroxide-based devices. This is the only detail of the explosives that has been released. No information about the detonators or the specific type of explosive used has been made public.
I felt a burning sensation on my hands, put my hands up to my face. I was on the floor by that point.
I saw a very bright light, sort of orangey yellow light, and what appeared to be silver sort of lines across which was the glass flying through the air.
And rather curiously, there are no reliable witnesses who reported seeing the 4 so-called suicide bombers that day in London. In fact, some people have reported that the police tried to pressure them into saying they had seen these 4 alleged suicide bombers.
According to the official narrative, the police had recovered documents bearing the names of Khan and Tanweer from the bomb site close to Aldgate Station by midnight on the 7th. 2 days later, MI5 told police that Khan had come to their attention in an earlier investigation.
London is the most surveyed city in the world. If the men were really on the tubes that day, then why is there no CCTV coverage of them on the London Underground?
According to the Home Office, Hasib Hussain exited King's Cross Underground onto Euston Road, attempted to contact the other 3 men on his mobile before re-entering the station to go to Boots and WH Smith's, where he may have bought a battery. At 9:06, Hussain reportedly went into McDonald's on Euston Road, spending about 10 minutes there. 3 minutes after that, he was reportedly spotted on Gray's Inn Road, before being possibly identified on a number 91 bus from King's Cross to Euston. The official report assumes that he then switched to the number 30 bus at Euston. At 9:47, a bomb went off on a number 30 bus, which after being diverted had ended up at Tavistock Square.
A red bus, emblematic of the City of London, was where the 4th and final explosion took place, when it exploded outside the British Medical Association in Tavistock Square. In my opinion, the damage is inconsistent with a single peroxide-based device detonating in one place. Unconfirmed reports by Stagecoach employees have suggested that irregular maintenance work took place on the bus in the weeks prior to 7/7. Although almost all London buses have CCTV, the 3 cameras on the bomb bus were not working that day. There has been no official explanation for this. The entire attack should have been caught on traffic cameras, yet no footage has ever been released. It is also important to note that none of the reported survivors have identified Hasib Hussain as the bus bomber.
The official report says Hussain was identified on the 10th of July from a driving licence and other documents recovered from Tavistock Square. The link was then made between these and the missing person report. Police then linked Hussain to Khan and Tanweer, presumably through the Leeds connection. On the 12th of July, a day of several apparent breakthroughs in Operation Thesis, the police announced that they had found documents belonging to 3 men suspected of carrying out the attacks. That day, police searched a number of properties linked to the men in Leeds and Aylesbury. 18 Alexandra Grove in Burley, Leeds, quickly became known as the bomb-making factory. It was later widely reported that the police had discovered a large quantity of explosives in the flat. Although the Home Office report indicated that Khan, Tanweer and Hussain had been linked to the suspected bomb factory at Alexandra Grove by unspecified forensic examination, there is no other evidence currently available to suggest that any of the 4 suspects had access to this property. There is no confirmation that Magdi El-Nashar, the Egyptian chemistry student, rented the flat to the group, as is suggested in the official narrative. To quote the official report, police, working on the theory that there is a King's Cross link to the 3 train bombs, all being broadly equidistant from there at the time of the explosions, identify a CCTV image of 4 men with rucksacks at King's Cross. They recognise Tanweer first from a DVLA photograph. The police identify CCTV images of the same 4 at Luton Station. That day the police had also reportedly received information that 4 people were seen putting on rucksacks at Luton Station car park. Later on, police carried out 9 controlled explosions on the Micra. The Brava, which was apparently towed away because it didn't have a parking ticket, is later traced to Lindsay. By the 15th of July, the police had discovered identification for all 4 suspects at the 4 blast sites. 3 days later, the police made it public that they believed Shahzad Tanweer, Mohammed Sadiq Khan, Jermaine Lindsay and Hasib Hussain were responsible for the blasts in 4 suicide attacks. The statement was couched in language which indicated the police had come to their analysis on the basis of limited circumstantial evidence. It was far from a firm conclusion. As the Intelligence and Security Committee stated in May 2006, the devices were almost certainly detonated manually by the bombers themselves in intentional suicide attacks. Police are, though, clear about one thing. The 4 men in no way fitted the established profile of a suicide bomber. Tanweer, 22, who lived in Leeds, was a sports science graduate who helped out with his family's business. Although he drove a Mercedes, he had supposedly hired a Nissan Micra, which was reportedly used as the vehicle to transport himself, Khan and Hussain to Luton. Staff at rental companies have been instructed by police not to disclose information to journalists or investigators. A number of sources have recalled Tanweer playing cricket with friends in Leeds the night before the bombings. According to the Home Office report, he was filmed at Woodall services on the M1, buying snacks and arguing with a member of staff over his change at 4:54 a.m, hours before the blasts. Hussain, 18, still lived with his parents and his brother in Leeds. He had completed his NVQs at college and had just been accepted to study a business degree. He was engaged to be married. Lindsay, 19, born in Jamaica, had lived in Britain since childhood. Married with a young son, he was expecting his 2nd child. A carpet fitter by trade, he lived in Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire at the time of 7/7, but was reportedly considering moving to Leeds. Khan, 30, married with a daughter, was also expecting his 2nd child. The teaching assistant and youth worker from Leeds was highly praised by colleagues and students alike. Access to his local education authority file revealed that Khan had been trusted by the police to the point of helping them in work designed to combat the problem of gangs in Leeds. Evidence of Khan's pursuit of terrorism is far from conclusive. It's important to note that there are several reported terrorists with the name Mohammed Khan. Media stories of Khan's terrorist links, gleaned through anonymous security sources, remain unconfirmed. From what is known of Mohammed Sadiq Khan, it would seem unlikely that he could have been in a position to meet terrorists in Israel and the Philippines. The Home Office inquiry looked into these media allegations and found that they had no basis. Soon after the attacks, allegations surfaced of terrorist training and anti-Western indoctrination at gyms in Leeds, which Khan helped to run. The official narrative found these reports incomplete, conflicting, and based on hearsay. The Home Office admits it is difficult to be sure what the facts are. No reliable evidence has emerged that Tanweer, Hussain, or Lindsay were motivated by religious and political issues to the point of violence. The men were almost certainly against the war in Iraq, a view shared by the majority of the British public. Millions of people have protested against the Iraq war in London. Why would any Islamic terrorist indiscriminately target people who have actively shown their contempt at the British government's decision to send troops to fight an illegal war? After the 7/7 bombings, the public was immediately told that the explosions bore the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda.
Has the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda.
It has the hallmarks of an Al-Qaeda-based organisation.
After the incident, the authorities changed their rhetoric about Al-Qaeda. Politicians were now referring to a movement rather than an international organisation.
What we are confronting here is an evil ideology.
The implication being that anyone could be part of Al-Qaeda without being connected to actual terrorists. In fact, the day after 7/7 and 4 weeks before his death, Robin Cook made the point in an article in The Guardian. Al-Qaeda, literally the database, was originally the computer file of the thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with help from the CIA to defeat the Russians. The government narrative released in May 2006 makes it relatively clear that the four men had nothing to do with the somewhat mythical Al-Qaeda organisation. In the days after 7/7, a claim on a website, hosted in America, was reported by the mainstream press as possible proof of an Al-Qaeda connection. The media covered the story, even though it was obvious anyone could make such a claim and post it on the net.
And your support of them makes you directly responsible.
The video released through Al Jazeera on the 1st of September 2005 did appear to portray political and religious motivation.
You will be our targets.
Those who knew Khan questioned the video's authenticity. The lip sync is certainly out at times, as if it had been heavily edited. Given that the video is of unknown provenance, it is highly unlikely it would be admissible as evidence in court. Other alleged Al-Qaeda videos have been deemed by many to be hoaxes. There has been no expert analysis of the video's credibility. The press insinuated that the video of Mohammed Sadiq Khan was evidence of his involvement with Al-Qaeda terrorists. Even if the video is completely authentic, Khan makes no reference in it to planning any attack.
At first, the authorities stated that the men were clean skins, suspects who'd not previously come to their attention. But shortly after 7/7, it was revealed that MI5 had terrorist records of Khan and Tanweer. If we look at the information in the public domain, then it certainly does appear that Khan may have intended to fight war in an occupied zone like Iraq or Palestine, especially if MI5's recording of him discussing jihad abroad is genuine. If the recording is authentic, then MI5 has serious questions to answer. If Khan did come to attention on the periphery of a terrorist investigation and was not a threat, as MI5 have asserted, then it is reasonable to speculate that he may have been an agent of the intelligence services. If this was the case, then he would have had to behave like an extremist in order to win the trust of those he was tasked to report on.
If these are clean skins, how can we blame the security services for not having been on their trail? As it's turned out, as I think was predictable and predicted, this has turned out to be not the case. Really, the level of information that was coming in about Khan, particularly if these American reports especially, which now seem to be being backed up by the actual American authorities, not just appearing in an author's book, that they tipped off the British about the specifics of Khan. And this was quite a serious plot in the United States that we were talking about, an attempt to blow up synagogues and so on. The amount of information coming in and the quality of information coming in, the fact that that has been so consistently overlooked, it would appear, by the Security Service MI5, to me suggests really only one of two options. Either A, we've got a level of incompetence that would be unusual even for the Security Service, but B, possibly, and this is a possibility, that his man Khan may even have been working as an informant for the Security Service. It's difficult otherwise to see how it can be that they've so covered his tracks in the interim.
Since the bombings, information has been leaked to the press, rather than being officially released to the public, or seemingly even the government. The time has come for our laws to change. It is no longer acceptable that the intelligence services can hide behind a veil of secrecy and play games with the media and the government. From my own experience of working within the intelligence services, I know that MI6 runs agents of influence within terrorist groups. I also know that the secret services provide forged documentation and safe houses to the terrorists they're working with to help them evade detection and capture. Former US Attorney General and current terrorism expert John Loftus told Fox News that Aswat had been arrested in 1999 in connection with a terrorist training camp. He had been later released after MI6 had interceded on his behalf. The clear implication was that Aswat was an MI6 agent.
Aswat is believed to be the mastermind of all the bombings in London.
On the 7/7 and 7/21, this is the guy, we think.
This is the guy, and what's really embarrassing is that the entire British police are out chasing him, and one wing of the British government, MI6, or the British Secret Service, has been hiding him. And this has been a real source of contention between CIA,
Hold on,
the
John.
Justice Department, and Britain.
MI6 has been hiding him. Are you saying that he has been working for them?
Oh, I'm not saying it. This is what the Muslim Sheikh said in an interview in a British newspaper back in 2001.
So he's a double agent, or what?
He's a double agent.
He's
Yeah,
working for the. So he's working for the Brits to try to give them information about Al-Qaeda, but in reality, he's still an Al-Qaeda operative.
Yeah, the CIA and the Israelis all accused MI6 of letting all these terrorists live in London, not because they were getting Al-Qaeda information, but for appeasement. It was one of those you leave us alone, we leave you alone kind of things. Now, we knew about this guy Aswat. Back in 1999, he came to America. The Justice Department wanted to indict him in Seattle because him and his buddy were trying to set up a terrorist training school in Oregon.
So they indicted the buddy, right? But why didn't they indict him?
Well, it comes out, we've just learned that the headquarters of the U.S. Justice Department ordered the Seattle prosecutors not to touch Aswat.
Hello. Now, hold on. Why?
And that's, well, apparently Aswat was working for British intelligence.
In the weeks after 7/7, Aswat was arrested in Zambia. He was subsequently sent back to the UK and is still, at this moment, in HMP Belmarsh. The US are trying to extradite him back there under terrorist charges. Several media outlets have reported that Aswat was in communication with the so-called suicide bombers on the day of 7/7. Yet this information, although being taken seriously by certain quarters in the intelligence services, is not being taken seriously by the Met. They have failed so far to question Aswat in connection with his suspected role in the bombings.
The intelligence community considers Al-Mujahideen, the organisation that Aswat was associated with, to have been a British-based recruiting wing of a larger terrorist network. It is understood that since the 1990s, the British security services have allowed Muslims to be recruited and trained in order for them to fight in conflicts around the world, where their role would be beneficial to the state. Crispin Black, the former Cabinet Office intelligence analyst, has suggested that the failure to pursue many terrorist suspects in Britain is as a result of an appeasement known as the Covenant of Security. According to Black, this refers to the long-standing British habit of providing refuge and welfare to Islamic extremists on the unspoken assumption that if we give them a safe haven here, they will not attack on these shores. There are some unconfirmed reports that Khan and the other men were in contact with members of Al-Mujahideen. If this is true, then the men may have been assisted by terrorists linked to the organisation. In other words, it is possible that terrorists trained with the aid of British intelligence agencies may have instructed and trained the four men. The government reports do not reveal whether associates of Al-Mujahideen were linked in any way to the bombings. Its spiritual leader, Omar Bakri, was banned from Britain shortly after 7/7. As a result, he has yet to be questioned for his possible role in the attack. It is also notable that the reports make no attempt to assess the warnings provided by the Saudis, the Americans, and the French. A leaked 4-page Joint Intelligence Committee report revealed that there was prior knowledge of plans to attack the London Underground network. The reports again do not reveal what this intelligence was based on. The events which occurred on the 21st and 22nd of July are still surrounded in mystery. All of the men arrested for the incidents on the 21st have pleaded not guilty to the charges of attempted murder and conspiracy to cause explosions. Some claim to have purposely made dummy bombs and profess that their plan was to intimidate rather than to kill or maim. Nothing about these incidents appears to make any sense. Why John Charles de Menendez was shot over half a dozen times in the head as he boarded a tube in Stockwell Station is also still a matter with no satisfactory explanation. The police lied to the public about his behaviour, and CCTV evidence, critical to the investigation, was tampered with, although it is not clear by whom. What is clear is that after these two events, the 7th of July bombings quickly became old news, just at the very point mainstream journalists had started to ask pertinent questions. The terrorist alert level had been lowered more than a month before the attacks, from severe general to substantial. It is not clear why MI5 advised the government to reduce the threat level. The meeting of the G8 leaders in Scotland was surely a time when security should have been increased.
We are united in our resolve to confront and defeat this terrorism that is not an attack on one nation, but on all nations and on civilized people everywhere.
At the time, the G8 had made little real progress with debt relief or abolishing poverty. But this fact was barely reported due to the inevitable focus on the bombings.
The war on terror goes on. I was most impressed by the resolve of all the leaders in the room. Their resolve is as strong as my resolve, and that is we will not yield to these people. We will not yield to the terrorists.
Since the July 7 attacks, further anti-terror legislation has been passed. The biometric identity scheme has been approved, and the legislative and regulatory reform bill has been proposed. It would give ministers the power to amend any law passed by Parliament. The government have taken political advantage of the attacks, using them as an effective rallying cry when seeking support for changes long on their agenda. Many who saw these laws as evidence of increasing totalitarianism prior to 7/7 now see them as acceptable in the climate of fear created by the bombings.
Due to the conflicting and unconfirmed stories published in the media and the distinct lack of well-sourced information, it is impossible to say exactly what happened in London on the 7th of July 2005. The two government reports make no attempt to explain the anomalies in the explosives used. They make no reference to the coincidence of a counter-terrorist exercise taking place that morning. They do not investigate Haroon Rashid Aswat, reported to be both the mastermind of the attacks and an MI6 agent. The inquiries do not deal with the Khan video or the Al-Qaeda claims. And most importantly, there is no attempt to explain why there are so few CCTV images of the men in London and in Luton. If there is no definitive proof that the men were suicide bombers, then why isn't this made clear? The two government reports do not give a detailed or definitive account. They only raise more questions than they answer. The British public must question why ministers will not allow open and independent scrutiny of the evidence. The British people must exercise their democratic rights and insist there is a full-scale inquiry into the events of July the 7th.
Well, we're just about to bring them in a moment, so they're direct.
This is a professional home video.
Have they got a contact number they can ring you on?
I haven't actually got a mobile on me, mate.
So your number was?
It's 07
Yeah.
956.